All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping into a genuinely dark, gothic fantasy narrative, a massive, dramatic clash between absolute order and absurd chaos. We're exploring The Wit and the Architect, parables of the absurd void. Across 4 distinct parables, we're going to trace the complete downfall of a grim mental empire. It's a wild ride from a state of frozen perfection to a completely raw, blood-slicked existence. So, let's get into the story.
We really have to set the stage with this incredibly biting exchange. On one side, we have Sinos, the architect. He decrees with total authority from his throne, silence is absolute. It's this manufactured, heavy, entirely frozen silence. But then, cutting straight through that rigid dogma, comes the reply, just a sharp, mocking laugh from the intruding wit. You see, this isn't your standard clash of armies. It's the rigid, desperate demand for quiet, violently colliding with the disruptive, undeniable force of sound. And that perfectly captures the fundamental conflict of our whole narrative. On one hand, you've got the architect's grim, manufactured realm. It's all about static control and frozen silence, basically an entirely artificial tension. But opposing him? The wit's visceral arsenal. We're talking chaos, the absurd, and this incredibly raw, blood-slicked existence. We're about to watch that static order inevitably and totally surrender to the chaotic void.
So, let's start with Act 1, the blade of the first laugh.
We begin our first parable in an era of what's called unearned majesty. Picture this, Sinos, draped in these black, mocking, priestly robes, sitting inside a literal vault of frozen perfection. He fully, genuinely believes his silence is absolute. But the text warns us right away that this kind of cold intellect is actually incredibly fragile. The heavy silence of his fortress isn't peace. It is merely the breath held before a scream. It's a completely manufactured reality that is just begging to be interrupted.
And interrupt, the wit absolutely does. The wit enters this frozen vault bearing no iron, no stone, no traditional weapons at all. The weapon is simply the absurd. With just a single outburst, that unbinding power of laughter acts as a jagged blade, slicing right through the heavy silence like a hot wire through ice. The big takeaway here is clear. Literally no amount of cold, rigid intellect can withstand the sharp intrusion of a joke told at the edge of the void.
Which brings us to Act 2, the peeling of the gilded skin. As that laughter echoes out, this supposedly unshakable mental fortress begins to violently groan under its own impossible rigidity. Sinos had used these gilded cages of logic to try and bind the fluid spirit of reality. But against the wit's mockery, they find absolutely no purchase. And here's the crazy part. These cages aren't broken by brute force. They are peeled away, literally like dead skin. It reveals that logic itself is nothing more than a thin epidermal layer, barely covering the raw, chaotic broth of existence underneath.
Now, what actually held those cages together were Apollonian gaskets. These were seals the architect specifically used to lock away his deepest secrets and suppress the truth of the chaos. But as the laughter peels away the logic, those gaskets begin to leak. Stripped of his defensive seals, the architect is left shivering, completely exposed to the very elements he so desperately tried to suppress. The rigid impossibility of his own mind is just totally crushing him.
Moving right along to Act 3, the surreal playhouse crucible. Think about how this progression unfolds. The silent tomb doesn't just fall down. It undergoes this grotesque metamorphosis into a surreal playhouse. We go from the frozen vault to the echoing laughter to the peeling of the cages until we finally arrive at a completely blank cosmic page. The immutable master architecture is essentially forced to perform its own funeral, completely transformed by the wit's presence.
This bizarre new state is called the logic of the crucible. The rigid, perfect lines of the architect's design begin to literally melt. It's a fermentation of certainty. The architect's disappearing ink finally fades entirely, rendering the cosmic page totally blank. Absolute order doesn't go out in some quick blaze of glory, right? It experiences a slow, colorful death, turning a grim empire into this totally humiliating spectacle of meaningless motion.
And now, Act 4, Unmasking the Crimson Maw.
So, we finally reach the climax of the downfall. The architect stands entirely stripped of his authority. The last of the logic has dissolved. The wit now reaches out for the crimson mask, which is this visceral symbol of the architect's secret allegiance. As he reaches out, we really have to ask, what is truly hiding behind this facade of order? What is the actual truth behind Sinos' manufactured perfection?
The unmasking reveals something absolutely terrifying. The mask is the literal face of the maw itself, feeding a hunger that logic could never ever satisfy. This is the ultimate revelation of the final sacrifice. The architect's carefully constructed architecture was never actually a shield to protect him. It was an altar. It was built specifically so that the spirit of becoming could finally feed. All that logic, it was only ever a mask for an insatiable void.
Finally, our epilogue, our secret longing for ruin.
This all brings us to a really deep, kind of unsettling psychological revelation. Sinos wasn't actually fighting to the bitter end. He was a submissive witness to his own ruin. That crimson mask proved his secret allegiance was always to chaos. The crucial takeaway here is that the architect secretly desired this destruction all along. He built an altar disguised as a fortress, basically acting out a compulsion to eventually feed the very void he pretended to fight against.
Which leaves us with this incredibly haunting final image. Stripped of absolutely everything, Sinos is left performing as a ghost in a playhouse that was always, from the very beginning, intended to be a feast for the void. It is a perpetual grave dance upon the ruins. His vaunted static control was nothing but a temporary staging ground for the absurd to inevitably claim its victory.
We've seen absolute silence, totally shattered by a laugh, gilded cages peeled away like dead skin, and a fortress unmasked as an altar to chaos. So I want to leave you with this somewhat chilling thought. Do we all harbor a secret longing for the unbinding power of the absurd to shatter our own grim mental fortresses? Is your logic, just like Sinos's, really just a mask waiting to be peeled away? Thanks for joining me for this dark, gothic explainer. Keep questioning the structures around you, and I'll catch you in the next one.